So let's take a look at a few more fun details from Games Workshop's Warhammer 40K Combat Patrol magazine. Looks like we've got a launch date, pricing confirmed on the first miniatures, and an intriguing new picture showing yet more miniatures added to the overall collection. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today I wanted to cycle back to the upcoming Hachette Partworks Combat Patrol magazine for Warhammer 40k. Basically the 10th edition version of the Imperium and the Conquest magazines that came before it, and can be an interesting way to get your hands on a bunch of shiny new Warhammer plastic, potentially at a lot less than what Games Workshop normally sells it for. The idea behind these is that they're weekly magazines, usually at £10 each apparently. There's a whole host of different ways that you can pick them up in different things that we'll talk about later, but I wanted to focus on the release date and first issue contents news, plus the picture that seems to update the miniatures that are contained within. For the release date, it looks like it's going to be launching in the UK on the 28th of August. Previously, we'd seen email confirmations that confirmed it would be August sometime. Looks like it's going to be towards the end of that month. This info is from Forbidden Planet, a third-party seller who will be stocking the magazine as they did with the last two. They've basically put the pre-order things up for listing on their website, and that confirms the 28th of August as the first time that you can pick up the first issue, which will be very, very cheap as we'll talk about, and contains the Space Marine Captain and Tyranid Prime. At the moment, it looks like the full release of the magazine isn't 100% confirmed or officially announced. I'm sure Games Workshop themselves will share it when it gets a bit more nearer the date. Previously, in January, we had the trial run of the magazine go live in the UK, and a few people got that. And at that point, we also got a whole bunch of teaser materials and nice pictures of what to expect from the collection, a lot of which was shared via Fohammer. There also appears to be a Warhammer Combat Patrol website. This at time of recording appears not to be functional yet. I'd guess that will come online when the launch goes live, and we'll get a bunch more details there. As mentioned, the general idea is that it's a 90-issue weekly run magazine at £10 each, though the first few are a lot cheaper, and can be one way that you can get a whole load of Warhammer for a lot less than Games Workshop would normally sell. This one is focusing on Combat Patrol sets, mostly the 9th edition ones for 40k, bar the launching Tyranid and Space Marine ones, so it does have a fair few people hyped for it. Outside of the UK, there's no current confirmation on when it will come to the USA and other countries. However, the last two have set really quite a clear precedent. The sequence of events usually tends to be that it comes to the UK, then around about 6 months later it hits the USA and Canada. It'll be January 2025 if they keep to the last couple of magazine schedules, and then Australia is often followed a few months after that, say June 2025. It's also come to a whole bunch of European countries as well, though exact times and releases have varied a bit there. Until we have any reason to suspect otherwise, I don't really see why this would be region locked any more than, say, the Imperium magazine was. So go by the assumption that it will be coming to the USA and other places, though obviously we'll be having to wait a bit longer than the UK, unfortunately. Otherwise, besides the release date news though, as mentioned, the main collection appears to have expanded a little bit. From the Forbidden Planet teaser images, it looks like there's a few miniatures swapped around, and at this point it at least seems likely that the new picture will probably be the more up-to-date and recent one, though for final confirmation I think it's still going to be best to actually see it come from the primary website itself. The changes aren't really enormous, but where they have been made they do appear to be positive. The broad thrust of the collection does seem to be the exact same as it was before. 7 combat patrols released in 9th edition, and then 2 combat patrols released in 10th. The 10th ones are the Tyranids versus Space Marines, and perhaps arguably a little bit lower value given that you can get them out of the Ultimate Starter set, so don't really have quite as much money contained as the ones for the other factions. As well as the 9 combat patrols though, you also get 1 additional unit for each faction. For example, the Space Marines have a Chaplain on bike, the Tyranids look like they have the Parasite of Mortrex, and the Orcs have a Boondaka Snazwagon. The changes that have been made appear to have subbed out a bunch of character miniatures for something a bit more bulky and in my opinion exciting. For the Eldari, instead of the Autarch, you've got 5 Wraithguard, which are considerably bigger, chunkier, and more points intensive plastic kits. Instead of the Commissar for the Astra Militarum, you instead get 3 heavy weapon teams, and instead of the Master of Possession for the Chaos Marines, you get 5 Chaos Terminators, which I think is quite a good upgrade, that one. Overall, that does broadly look like a big positive. And certainly for a lot of these kits, if you are ever able to pick up the specific issue that has one of these 40k units in its entirety, then there's a good chance that you're getting a deal far, far better than you could ever get it from Games Workshop or even discount retailers. Supply of the ones for any one miniature sold far below Games Workshop's normal value though do tend to be really quite limited. Obviously, lots of interest from a lot of people, given that discounts that good on Warhammer don't tend to come along very often. Otherwise, looks like Forbidden Planet also seemed to confirm the first issue pricing. This was previously teased to be £3 for the first issue, £7 for the second, and then £10 thereafter. It does look like that's staying, arguably at least compared with discount versus selling from Games Workshop. The first issue again looks like it's a ridiculously good deal, similar to how we had with the Space Marines and the Necrons last time round. Looks like the RRP is £2.99, so probably equating to something like roughly €4 or roughly $5 when it comes out in different places. And for that you get the Space Marine Captain from Leviathan and the Tyranid Winged Prime from Leviathan. Two character miniatures that Games Workshop sells for around about £25, so in theory £50 worth of miniatures in the magazine, all sold at a price of £3. In reality, if you wanted to use these as character miniatures though, I suspect the vast majority of current Space Marine and Tyranid collectors will already have these sculpts. They're very easy to get your hands on, both from the starter sets and Leviathan, and are really easy to find at fairly low prices versus Games Workshop, say on eBay and things. But if you collected Space Marines and Tyranids and for some reason didn't have these sculpts yet, then it seems like this is about the best deal on Warhammer that Games Workshop ever does. It is kind of hilarious that if you're selling two character miniatures for £3 each, you could do some very weird things if you could get your hands on lots of these. Maybe making entire squads of monopose Terminators. If you just manage to find yourself some Power Fists to swap out for the Power Sword, perhaps. Maybe you could try and remove a little bit of the bling and do some head swaps and things if you already had a regular Terminator kit. I feel like with a little bit of kit bashing and conversion, you could have an entire Terminator squad for around about half the price of the multi-part kits. Maybe convert some primes into more warriors or shrikes if you wanted, I guess. Probably that's a bit of a weird and alternative way to look at it, but either way, it's a way to get a couple of 40k characters that you could just literally paint up as painting projects, and always kind of fun to see very expensive characters being discounted to incredibly cheap rates. Otherwise, for Forbidden Planet, it looks like they've also listed the next few ones. It does indeed seem that issue 2 is £7 and then the next two are £10 each. The pricing on those does seem to be confirmed, but it looks like the contents aren't, as the pictures aren't listed. I think from the previous January previews, though, issue 2 was supposed to be 3 Von Ryan's Leapers, again for £7, that's really not bad. You can get them in the starter sets, but that's far cheaper than they usually get resold for on places like eBay. And then issue 3 is 5 Infernus Marines, and apparently some hobby supplies. And then issue 4 is a bunch of paints plus a brush, maybe a little bit less helpful as it kind of depends on you wanting that exact mix of paints. Otherwise, from Hachette Partworks and other things, there really are quite a lot of different ways to actually get your hands on all the miniatures. The primary way would normally be to subscribe from Hachette Partworks themselves. If you do that, then the magazines turn up in bundle shipments of 4 magazines, and they have a few other incentives to go directly through them, with things like bonus free gifts, often things like hobbying supplies or binders and things thrown in. And that's perhaps one of the more guaranteed ways to get your hands on the entire subscription, though I would say that their customer service feedback has been a bit mixed at best. I've certainly read plenty of things where people have had absolutely great experiences with them, but also a fair few things where people weren't able to get their hands on missing shipments. And I believe that there was a controversial thing with charging people for something they didn't necessarily want last time round. Another option directly through them is to buy individual issues through their website, but often the good ones tend to go pretty fast, at least partly due to scalping. Kind of makes sense though that if they're selling something that's just directly far cheaper than the same thing through Games Workshop, there's going to be a rush to capitalise, both from hobbyists and scalpers alike. Otherwise, you can subscribe from third parties such as Forbidden Planet. It seems they offer the magazines at a discount, though I'm not too clued up as to the pros and cons versus going with them versus Hachette beyond that. Plenty of physical stores and newsagents will have them. Could be worth calling in to see if people can reserve certain copies of things. I believe WH Smith often has them in the UK. And even if you can't be bothered trying to find the magazines from any of those sources, eBay and reselling should mean that certain models suddenly go cheap when certain magazines come out. It does mean that it could be worth keeping an eye out for certain magazines that have things vastly discounted from Games Workshop, as it might be possible to pick up those miniatures far cheaper than normal temporarily. Finally, beyond all that, through Hachette Partworks themselves, there'll be the option to get a premium subscription, which is basically an extra £2 per issue, and then you get a total of 8 other kits over the course of the whole subscription. It looks like they're normally dispensed towards the end of quarters for them, and they include things like a Rogue or Dawn, a Hive Tyrant, and killer cans from the previous teasers. It looks like at least the on-paper discount is actually genuinely very good for the extra premium subscription. It might just depend on whether or not you're just overloading yourself with yet more models you won't be able to paint. Otherwise, for some other images from the last round of previews, there's a picture of a bunch of the things on the left, which I believe are the free things from the Hachette sub. Basic clippers and plastic glue early on, some different paintbrushes, some binders, a mug, and apparently a Primaris Company Champion sculpt. And another miniature that we know is coming at some point in the subscription is the unique Infernus Marine sculpt, with this one with him stomping a Tyrannid that's on fire into the ground. Judging by the other unique sculpts for the magazines in the past, he will likely be fairly early on in the entire process. Issue 5 on the listing for the Forbidden Planet magazines appears to show a picture of him, and I guess that hints that it could be for that one, though I feel like that's not definitely confirmed yet. But means if you want to get this particular Space Marine, it might well be worth keeping your eyes peeled early. Otherwise, as mentioned, they did show off some pictures of the things that would supposedly be in the premium sub. I guess an extra £160 or so over the course of the collection. It does seem that you get far more miniatures than that, at least by Games Workshop prices. The Rogue Dawn's about a third of that just in itself, and then there's a Brutalis Dreadnought, Hive Tyrant, Demon Prince, Howling Banshees, and a few others. Otherwise, last time I did do a rough value calculation for how much you'd save with going with the Combat Patrol magazine, and since I last looked at it, it looks like the deal on paper's got a little bit better, at least partly because Games Workshop's just jacked up the prices on all their miniatures, and that's going to make the magazine look like a slightly better deal by comparison for the miniatures contained. Doing a little bit of rough and ready adaptation on those numbers, it looks like assuming you get this over 80 issues and then the last 10 are other weird and wonderful things that they add in as per last time. The sub would cost you £787, potentially plus a bit of postage, and that would save you around about £500 compared with if you bought the Combat Patrols and kits directly from Games Workshop, so around about 40% or so off there. Obviously I wouldn't really compare it to Games Workshop though, as you can get all of this at discount retailers. If you bought things through one of the 20% discount retailers like Element Games often do, the saving doesn't tend to be quite as big, around about 24% off as opposed to 40% off, and then that does drop further if the miniatures are your primary interest and you don't set much store by the hobby supplies, though to be fair with the amount of paints and things that you get with this, I suspect that a fair bit of it's going to come in useful. Looking at absolute worst case scenarios, and you have no value in any of the paints or paintbrushes and things, the miniature saving versus discount retailers looks like it's about 16% off, which perhaps is getting into the point where maybe you should just get the exact things that you wanted anyway. I feel like this sort of magazine is definitely going to appeal to one certain type of collector. It's a bit odd to collect Warhammer as basically 9 different mini armies as opposed to 1 or 2 major armies. Some people certainly do, but it doesn't tend to be the norm in my experience. As with the other ones, if you are looking to get some fairly maximal benefit, probably the best value is going to come from sniping individual issues if you can get your hands on them. Whenever something happens to be going for £10 that might be going for say about triple the price from Games Workshop Direct. In any case though, I think it's pretty interesting. Let me know your thoughts on the magazine down in the comments below. Are you going to be looking to pick up any of the first issues or the magazine sub in general? Let me know your thoughts. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, but I'll certainly keep the regular 40k news coming. I'll certainly look forward to taking another look at this once we get a bit more information. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description if you'd like to help support and keep all the videos coming. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.